Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly, House Bill 1438 adds a new section to the North Dakota Century Code, Chapter 3406. It creates a new minimum wage for tipped employees. The bill requires employers to increase tipped employees' hourly wage from $4.86 per hour to $5.75 per hour on August 1st, 2015, and increase the minimum wage by $1 per hour every second year until the minimum wage for tipped employees equals the state's standard minimum wage, which is currently $7.25. An employer must inform employees in advance that he is using the tip credit system, and he must maintain records showing the employee receives at least the current minimum wage of $7.25 when the wages are paid, and the tip credit when the paid wages and the tip credit are combined. If the employee does not have enough tips to make the difference, the employer must make up the difference. So an employee working as a server in the restaurant industry today is being paid at least the minimum wage. Testimony indicated that employee hourly wage, including tips for restaurant servers, ranges from $11 per hour to $35 per hour. This was further validated by several members of the committee who worked in the industry in their younger years or who had family working in the industry. Other testimony offered supporting that this bill is addressing a problem that isn't a concern of the employees in the restaurant industry. For many, this is their first job. Minimum wage plus tips provides a great start for them. The majority working in the industry are under 25 years of age. For many, this is a part-time work or secondary income. The Labor Commissioner testified complaints regarding tip wages are few, if any, and when they do have a complaint, generally it would involve pooled tips. This bill will add an unnecessary cost to an industry that is already struggling with rising costs. The increase in wages will ultimately result in an unnecessary increase in the price to the customer. The bill infringes on a system that is currently working well. It could result in fewer servers working more tables per shift. Members of the Assembly, we heard earlier testimony in another bill, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. Mr. Speaker and members of the Assembly, your IBL committee gave House Bill 1438 11-4 do not pass and ask that you concur. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any discussion? Representative Boucher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Assembly, hoping for a few green votes on this bill. I know it's not a very popular bill, but the intent of the bill is in no other industry are we as consumers asked to subsidize the wages of employees. And while testimony did point to the fact that a number of people do make a good living off of tipped work, that's not certainly true for all people who make minimum or tipped wages. If someone is making just the bare minimum of $7.25, and that's all this was asking to increase to over the next 4 years, they are only making $15,000 a year. Some testified or asked questions in regards to many people who work in the service industry that would receive these tipped wages are working this as a second or maybe even a third job. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that not even is minimum wage a livable wage in our state. As we see the rising increase of rent, milk prices, fortunately gas has gone down, so that helps folks out. But it's our hopes that by increasing the tipped wage to the minimum wage, we've reset the floor. There's one floor for all employees throughout the state. And if the generous consumers of different restaurants and bars throughout the state wish to thank folks for their good service, they can certainly continue to tip as well as they have in the past. So hoping for a couple green votes and appreciate your support.
Is there further discussion? Representative Ruby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. I would contend that pretty much anybody who's a consumer of either a goods or service company are paying for the wages of that employee. I had the opportunity this weekend to ask my daughter who works in the food industry about this and asked her about the pay. she said, well, first of all, there aren't too many people that start at that minimum wage and stay there. She said first she worked there for a little while, became a trainer, then later as a bartender. So her wages have went up as she has done that. Also, as far as the tips, on a good night, she certainly makes more than we do here per day. She basically said that on a lot of the weekends she can pull $30 to $33 an hour from her wages and tips included. So I think this is a right vote by the committee, and I don't think we need to change it. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Ammerman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Assembly, of course, I supported this bill in committee, and it isn't so much, it's just that in this one area with tips, I've never understood how this works, how when I go into a restaurant, when all you go into a restaurant and you get good, friendly service, I have no trouble giving the appropriate amount of tip. But what I've never understood is why myself, and all you, and all the citizens, our tips, we're actually paying wages. Now we don't own the restaurants or whatever, so we don't get no deductions anywhere. We don't get to write off expense for wages, but we're paying wages because it makes up the difference. I've just never understood that tips have to make up in this notched out industry, why the tips have to make up wages to meet the minimum wage. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't get to interview the employees when they interview for a job. I'm paying their wages. I don't get to interview them. So I've just never understood how the citizens of this state who go and pay for tips for kindly service and good service, why we're paying wages. So maybe someday somebody can explain it to me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further discussion? Representative Suket.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just add one more thing, that these folks that are working in the industry are working in the industry by their own choice. And there are none of them that are making less than minimum wage. In fact, hardly none are making minimum wage. Most all are making in excess of minimum wage. But they are there by choice. We would appreciate a red vote on this bill. Thank you.
Further discussion? Representative Mooney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Assemblyman. I would encourage a green vote on this bill. When you think about who serves you, I would dare say that the higher proportion is going to be female to male proportion. And when you talk about how much money these people are making, to hear that some may be making as high as $33 an hour, I would dare say that that is not the normal. You go to your normal, everyday, small-town restaurant, and most of these folks are going to be lucky to earn a minimum wage. And I would challenge all of us to ask ourselves in this day and age with our cost of living the way that it is, how many of us can live on a minimum wage to start with? I would ask that we begin to look at changing the tide, and this is a perfect time to do this. Change the tide in North Dakota from a dual class to a standard minimum wage. Give these women and these young adults, male and female, the ability to get into fields, service opportunities that pay well and may actually offer them the opportunity to rise above. Thank you, and please consider a green vote.
Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the Assembly. I've always felt that the tradition of tipping is a rather odd tradition. I've had trouble understanding it sometimes. I won't go into the merits or the demerits of that entire system of thought, but as a practical matter, just looking at this bill, it seems to me that the practical effects of it may be, and probably would be, a perception on the part of people that would be patronizing restaurants and service establishments within this state that they no longer need to tip these service people. And I'm wondering if that's a consequence that the bill sponsor and some of those who are speaking in favor of this bill would be in favor of. To me, it seems that if this bill passes, that's going to be the perception. And just from a pragmatic standpoint, I wanted to offer that observation. Thank you.
Representative M. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I worked my 18 years of college in bars, restaurants. I was also a bar owner. I have never earned less than minimum wage, and in fact, I've earned a great deal more than minimum wage as a worker. As a bar owner, and I did a quick calculation, I am no longer a bar owner, by the way, but I did a quick calculation with some assumptions that this bill would cost that bar $35,000 for the year. That was $35,000 we could not afford to pay. Secondly, I would present to you that a bar provides the product and the place by which these folks are tipped. So I think that is part of the reasoning to lower the minimum wage for bar restaurant workers. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Representative Ammerman, second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to comment on another previous speaker that if we put this in and then establishments come up with and tell their waitresses they have a no-tip policy there, the only thing I can see that maybe that'd be a problem, but I believe if he came up with that policy, he probably wouldn't get anybody to work for him if they couldn't get tips anyway. So I don't know if that'd be a problem. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the House has before it for final consideration House Bill 1438. Clerk, open the key and you may record your vote. Has every member voted? Representative B. Koppelman. Does any member wish to change their vote? Key will be closed and the clerk will take the record. Final vote shows 27 yea, 63 nay, 4 absent, not voting. House Bill 1438 is declared failed. Continuing on